Chapter 1. Martin, Flowers of Martinu. Like other planets of its type, it was born as a clump of boiling molten rock. When the lava covering its surface cooled, it solidified into a layer of bedrock. Then the water that poured down gathered in pools, becoming giant oceans. Within the oceans, chemicals that were as common as could be kept reacting in their run-of-the-mill way over and over again, gradually yielding proteins and sugars. Up until that point, the planet's story was like that of so many others. Granted, the planet was of a rare type on the galactic scale, but in terms of overall numbers, planets in general were plentiful. A fair few even had oceans with highly active cellular structures. That in itself was no miracle. But in that planet's oceans, something vanishingly rare occurred, the emergence of self-replicating molecules, which attached to cellular structures. The resulting primitive life forms absorbed organic matter, proliferated, and teemed across the waters of the world. The proliferating life forms competed against each other, and several species successfully incorporated enzymes catalyzing high-energy activity, thereby gaining supremacy over other, sluggish-at-best life forms. Almost no other planets had ever reached this stage of evolution. In this case, to call it a miracle would be no exaggeration. Furthermore, some among the primitive life forms acquired a special ability. Those life forms were traders, in a manner of speaking, for the free oxygen they released through the process known as photosynthesis proved poisonous to their fellow life forms. The kingdom capable of photosynthesis reproduced at intense rates, polluting the atmosphere and oceans with free oxygen in no time. Consequently, scads of life forms met their ends. Those that escaped death were either the life forms that lived in environments that tenaciously refused oxygen, or the life forms that acquired the art of utilizing oxygen. After epochs that were even lengthy on the cosmic scale, another miracle manifested in the planet's ecosystem. Multicellular structures, life forms composed of more than one cell, began arising. Multicellular life had existed before then, but those agglomerations of cells had no division of labor, they were just herds of cells. For these multicellular beings, on the other hand, each individual cell could not survive on its own, as it was a mere component of a larger whole. These multicellular life forms absolutely flourished. They appeared in multifarious forms, fighting for the survival of their respective species. In the shallows, fish with photosynthetic fibers resembling fur spread their hydro wings, while in the deeps, creatures with exoskeletons strode on their 8 radially arranged legs. Soft-bodied giant coelenterate established themselves on the deep sea floors, while extending their tentacles near the water's surface. Spherical sea trees rolled from the deeps to the shallows, adrift on the tidal currents, washing up on the shores of the landmasses that were biologically barren. Unequipped to survive on the land, they withered on the beaches, but the winds blew and scattered their seeds inland. The vast majority of the seeds that germinated failed to grow, but some did adapt to the land. Evolutionary variation ensued in the process, and they dominated the land in the blink of an eye. Particularly successful were the trees that laid dynamic seeds. Some of the seeds grew legs, while others possessed wings. The leg seeds marched inland like a massive herd aiming to cover the whole of the ground, while the wing seeds journeyed on the winds like little gliders. Eventually, other plant species timidly began to advance inland, while some of the more quick-witted animals sneaked their way in as well. That was where the curtain closed on the planet's miracles. Of course, another miracle or two could occur down the line, but that would likely take place eons from now. The next miracles in the chain did occur on a planet far, far away. There, many species gained high intelligence, with one in particular capable of stepping forward onto the stage of the stars. That especially intelligent life form traveled from a planet characterized by a parade of miracles to pay this planet, dubbed Martin, a planet that was a comparatively late bloomer, a visit. The endemic creatures never came up with a name for the planet, so they didn't object. Though, of course, they didn't exactly actively welcome it either. The alien life form set foot upon this land not long ago. They were not hostile to the native life. In fact, they demonstrated goodwill, and as such, the biosphere's cycle of life was not much disturbed. Even the more intelligent species might not have even noticed the planet had been invaded. While the indigenous species lived their everyday existences, persisting since ancient times, the aliens assiduously built up their own base of everyday life. Eventually, another set of aliens that shared a point of origin with the first set of aliens arrived. The second planetary invasion was also a very mild affair, but the original invaders' pride was badly wounded. Yet there was a more pressing problem than even the blow to their self-esteem, for it was then that the first set of aliens learned that the universe was in an era of upheaval. They had to accept that their isolated and quiet lifestyle was never to return, and that they had been swallowed by that galactic turmoil without an escape rope. That terrible agitation had reached the carefree primitive life forms as well. Many creatures that would otherwise have died in obscurity on planet were brought to the threshold of the stars. "Gent, the flowers look about ready to bloom," said Lin Sion Roke Dryer Hater Jeant, looking up from the dining table. "Oh, morning, Lafier. You eat breakfast yet?" "Not yet," said Roibamues Laborer, Star Forces Vice Hecto Commander, Avrielsek ne Dubersker Perian Lamhair, shaking her head. "Well then, how about breakfast together?" Jint gestured toward the chair. "Did you not hear me?" said Lafier, remaining on her feet. "The flowers are about to bloom." "Yeah, I heard about it, too," said Jint as he scooped his scrambled eggs with a Sreric fork spoon. Lately, he was feeling a bit sleep-deprived. His head felt numb, and he didn't have much of an appetite. "Then why are you still eating?" Lafier asked, casting a look. "What do you mean?" "I'm not done eating," he explained, clearly and concisely. Despite his status as a count, Jint was raised in a modest home, and he felt pangs of conscience at the prospect of wasting leftover food. "You idiot," she assessed his character, clearly and concisely. "A flower blooms, a cat is born." Jint glanced at the corner of the room where Sir Crooka's labor bed was installed. The white Ov cat was feeding her 3 newborn kittens with her milk. Ov cats were active by nature, but they were also exceedingly docile in character. The exception was before and after giving birth. They'd expended some effort transporting Sir Crooka to the labor bed after she'd gone into labor atop one of the shelves in the commodities warehouse, and whenever they tried to touch the kittens, the cat lost her cool. It was on Jint to decide what would become of the kittens, as a result of his consultation with Lafier. But as things stood, it was probably wise to wait a while before finding the kittens a new owner. Besides, Jint wanted to be with the kittens for a little longer. Jint returned Lafier's gaze and said, "Flowers don't wilt immediately. Why all the fuss? Aren't they special flowers to you?" "Ah," he said, rising from his seat. "You mean those flowers? Shoulda told me sooner. I didn't think you were that slow. Why would I inform you about any old normal flowers?" "True enough, but I just got up and my head's not working properly yet," explained Jint. Had he been in typical form, he would have at least thought to ask which flowers she was referring to. "Liar. You're always like that," declared the royal princess. "Well, if you're not sharp enough to know I'm not that sharp, what's that make you? You're so unexceptional sometimes it's a work of art. If you're not the sharpest, you should stay that way. That defies logic. What are you going to do? Are you going to go see the flowers or keep eating?" "I'll go see 'em," he said, pushing away the plate. "Would you like me to lower it?" asked the table. "Yep. Please do," said Jint, but not without feeling guilty. The center of the table, on which his plate of leftovers rested, proceeded to sink down. Jint gazed with regrets aplenty as his breakfast vanished from view. "You're surprisingly plebeian," said Lafier, amazed. "If you were that hungry, you didn't need to be so hasty. The flowers won't wither that quickly. That's not it. Those flowers are at their most beautiful the moment they bloom, and it doesn't take long after they start blooming for them to be in full bloom. Also, I'm not hungry. I'm just sad I couldn't fulfill my duty." "What duty?" "I really don't think you'd understand," he deflected, not feeling like explaining. "You don't know that." Jin saw her earnest eyes and became racked by a different guilt altogether. It appeared as though Lafier was taking his wisecracking seriously. He almost wanted to tell her that he was just putting a little twist on the nugget of discipline they'd drilled into him when he was a kid to always eat the entirety of the food he was given by calling it a full-blown duty. "Never mind that. Let's just go see the flowers. They really might bloom any moment now." He dodged again, summoning and mounting a personal transporter. Then he tendered a hand to Leifir. "Come on." "Okay." Leifir wasn't entirely satisfied, but she too stepped aboard. The transporter then began to shuttle them forward. The ship they were currently on was called the patrol ship Bokbarach. The ship had actually already been retired from service, its armaments mostly removed. Therefore, it was more accurately a Rebisid Solacina, lightly armored cargo passenger ship, named the Bokbarach Mura, former Bokbarach, though in casual speech it was referred to by the name it bore when it was a patrol ship. The only weapons left were the twin mobile laser cannon turrets. The main engine systems and space-time bubble generators were still installed, but they were just awaiting their inevitable removal. And that would occur once the Bokbarach reached the Countdom of Hyde. When that happened, the Bokbarach would lose its function as an interstellar ship and become the Garish Dryor Hader, Manor of the Count of Hyde. Needless to say, the ship's takeoff deck would become the Manor's spaceport. Larger vessels would not be able to enter the port, but for the time being that wasn't likely to be a concern. The giant-sized Zokrahawksitr, space-time mobile mine deck, and Zokrsair, engine deck, meanwhile, would be reassigned as office work sections for the purpose of reigning over the territory nation, residential areas for the servant vassals, and more. The SAM, reactor furnaces, and antimatter fuel tanks, which wrung out vast quantities of energy, would also be uninstalled, with solar cells expanded to cover for the Manor's electricity needs. Nevertheless, the current Bokbarach retained vestiges of a combat ship. At the very least, there could be no doubt whatsoever it was a ship equipped to navigate multiple star systems. That was because at this very moment, it was sailing through planar space. A modest garden, itself an installation left over from the vessel's patrol ship days, had been set up on the outskirts of the residential area. But the garden's environment had been changed, adjusted to that of Jint's home planet of Martinu. The transporter passed through a double door and stopped at the center of the garden. All the plants growing there were native to Martinu. They were the offspring of the flowering plants that had been exported from the territory nation after the planet had been incorporated into the Empire and before it had been captured by the Three Nations Alliance. Unlike the plant species, now all over the human-populated galaxy, that originated from Earth, very few of Martinua's plant species were the type that sprouted flowers. There were only a handful of exceptions to that rule. And those exceptions were planted on the edge of the garden opposite the entrance. The flowers were named Bryant flowers after their discoverer. And since they were already in full bloom, Jint couldn't help but feel disappointed. "They're rather lackluster," said Leifir behind him. "Thanks for your candid words," said Jint. Earth origin flowers had been selectively bred over and over again over lengthy months and years to please the eye. If Bryant flowers, said to be the most exquisite of Martinua's few flower species, were to be displayed alongside Earth origin flowers, they'd fall under the shabby category. "But my planet's flowers are at their prettiest the moment they bloom," said Jint. "And that goes for Bryant flowers too. People appreciate Earth origin flowers when they're still, but on my planet, they view flowers as they're in motion." You saw how big the buds were. Jint gripped a flower vine. "That was stuffed with this. When the buds open, this vine will peek through. Almost like it's exploding." "That sounds a little unsafe." "There's nothing dangerous about it. It's so beautiful, that's why I was on the lookout." "Because that's what you told me." "Sorry," said Jint, shooting her a sheepish look. There were two reasons he felt so awkward. The first went without saying, the fact that what Jint had told her had weighed on Leifir's mind, but he'd been so dense. When he'd gone into how beautiful Bryant flowers were while they were blooming, she seemed less than fascinated. The second reason was that they were having a casual back and forth about something as trivial as the timing of flowers blooming. The galaxy was at war. This very second, another multitude of lives was getting snuffed out somewhere in planar space. Naturally, it wasn't as though Jint had started this war, and the Empire guaranteed him the right to step out of the fight at any time, at the cost of his noble rank, and with it, the right to dwell among the stars. Besides, now that he was riding on interstellar ships as an imperial noble without participating in the fight, he was feeling guilty over that, too. He had trouble wrapping his mind around Leifir at the moment. Jin saw himself as unfit to be a soldier, anyway he sliced it. Leifir, on the other hand, truly seemed a born soldier. If even a lousy soldier like Jint was feeling somewhat ill at ease, how was Leifir so composed this far from the field of battle? "What's the matter, Jint?" she asked, visibly dubious. "Are you in some kind of mood to stare at my face? Can you blame me? You idiot." At that moment, Jint's wrist gear beeped. It was a communication from Istake, a fellow passenger of Jint's dispatched by the Chancellor's office. "Lanyu Dryor. It's time. I'm rather surprised you're not in the conference room." "I'm sorry. I'll be there right away," said Jint. Yestash was the reason behind Jint's current sleep deprivation. That was not to say he was a bad person. He was just being diligent about his work. "There's a meeting. Wanna come?" he asked Leifir. "Of course I do. I'm here as a representative of the Royal House of Cryab as well." Taking into account the fact that he was a young man in his 20s, Jint was certainly well-to-do. Of course, the only assets of the House of Hyde were the Countdom of Hyde itself, and while it was occupied by the enemy, he received no income as a grandee. That being said, as might be expected from his wealth of experience getting caught up in the fires of war, the Empire had established a system of compensation for nobles whose star fiefs had been taken over. As such, Jint was able to receive an annuity from imperial coffers, a figure more than 10 times the pay of a beginning star pilot. Taking into account the fact that he was a grandee, however, he was next to broke. A star fief can produce enormous profits, but maintaining and running one also takes eye-watering amounts of money. Amounts of money Jint didn't have. Not having had occasion to use any of it, the lion's share of Jint's funds were in his savings. And all of it would get blown immediately operating the Bokbaruch for a single day. Yet lack of funding was not that much of an issue. Most newly appointed grandees faced the same troubles, after all. Financing a new territory nation was an extremely solid investment, so normally, there was no shortage of lenders. In fact, lenders would come like a swarm of locusts, whether or not their services were asked for. Except now it was wartime. The Ov had two sides to them, the mercantile race and the war-making race. And this was the season for the latter side to stand out. Outside of the very eccentric, people were more concerned about the tides of war than increasing their fortunes. But that wasn't all, for unlike other fiefs, the Countdom of Hyde was by no means a secure investment. Depending on the fruit of battle, the Countdom might even have to be abandoned again. And if that happened, each lender's investment might ultimately go to waste. Due to those factors and more, Hyde would have trouble getting financing, despite having just returned to Empire control. It was probably fortunate, then, that Jint had inherited his noble rank under the guardianship of the King of Cryab, Dubious, otherwise known as Leifir's father. The Royal House of Cryab was awash in monetary resources. Naturally, it wasn't interest-free. It looked as though no matter the circumstances, if they were to neglect potential profits, it would wound their pride as a mercantile race, but still, they were lending him capital at an extraordinarily low interest rate, considering the state of affairs. Needless to say, it was not a custom of the Royal House of Cryab to send the royal princess just because they'd agreed on a loan. In addition, in Jin's view, Leifir lacked a sense for money, which was unbefitting of a member of a mercantile race's imperial household, and made her not so useful as a representative of the interests of the royal house, either. If they'd really wanted someone to accompany him for the stated reason, they'd have chosen a servant vassal who was knowledgeable about accounting. There was no way the Royal House of Cryab lacked a single expert on economics. In short, Leifir's title as the Royal House of Cryab's representative was secondary to her real role. In reality, she was merely helping her family's enterprise as a side goal, however ineffectively, while on what was primarily a personal trip. Her actual title might be something along the lines of Jint's travel companion, which, Jint mused, might just be the dullest and most trifling duty in all Leifir's years. Then again, he figured that with a lifespan that wearisomely long, a less intense period like this wouldn't be so bad. "Won't you be bored at the meeting, though? We Avriels are accustomed to boredom." "Oh yeah, I guess so." The souls of the Avriels were clad in the blazing armor of imperial wrath, or so rumor had it. Yet they made sure to do right by dealing with the tedious functions that attended the imperial household as well. Maybe that's a boon you gained from your training from an early age. I shudder to think how much effort was spent beating a spirit of patience into you, given your clan's innate disposition. What are you trying to say? Leifir's eyebrows were at that dangerous angle. I'm saying it must be hard to become emperor. I don't think that's what you were getting at. I'm sure you're just imagining things. If we weren't just about to conduct public business, I'd have you try to prop up your body weight with your right pinky toe. Jin could think of a handful of clever comebacks, but he knew enough to seal those remarks deep into the recesses of his heart. Guess public business is good for something, then, he said, in lieu of other options. As they headed for the conference room, Jin wondered how Saabash and Ekriwa were doing. Elish portal in E-10 seconds. 8, 7, 6, said the navigator, the countdown filling the otherwise empty bridge. Sobak Yumdor Yuth had thought the countdown always amounted to the same no matter who did the counting, but now he'd changed his mind. That woman's voice was made for countdowns. There was no emotion to it whatsoever. 3, 2, 1, passing through. Cheers all throughout the ship, and the bridge was no exception. After a brief span of open elation, the bridge personnel came to Ship Commander Saabash to voice their congratulations. But those remarks were short, and Saabash himself kept his reply to a short nod. There was still work to do. Ekriwa alone was detached aloof. The Sopaic raid ship, Flickob, had now completed its familiarization voyage, returning to the imperial capital of Lokvakar. This meant that the Flickob was now full-fledged. And although his title wouldn't change, Saabash too felt as though he'd be regarded as a full-fledged commander, now that the Flickob was officially the first ship under his beck and call. Raid ships were an all-new type of vessel within the Star Forces. Though assault ships had been deemed overly fragile, eliminating them entirely and replacing each with a patrol ship wasn't a cost-effective strategy. That was why this new class of ship was conceived, essentially taking patrol ships and leaving their mine deployment capabilities on the cutting room floor. More accurately, they were closer to Garoba, heavyweight assault ships, but their principal weapons were EM cannons, just like patrol ships. The great debate on whether to dub them heavyweight assault ships or Rezaxora, lightweight patrol ships, embroiled not only warship management headquarters, but even many top-level leaders of the Star Forces. The Cobb class was the first class ever designed for raid ships, and the Flickob was one of the first 12 Cobb-class vessels to be placed in commission. Holding the reins of a new class of ship fresh off the blueprints was a daunting task, but distinguished in equal measure. As such, Saabash had no complaints regarding his current post. This duty was beyond an honor. Saabash had only just risen to the rank of Vice Hecto-Commander, a promotion that would normally be unthinkably fast, given that he'd only been a Vanguard star pilot a few days prior. Of course, if he devoted half of his life to the Star Forces, it wouldn't be surprising if he'd reached the rank of Commodore by this age. This kind of imperial edict was often enacted in past wars and served as proof that the Empire was going all out. That didn't mean that the Empire hadn't taken the war seriously up until that point. It was simply a matter of personnel composition. There weren't enough ships or lower-ranked star pilots, but they couldn't then just populate ships solely with higher-ranked star pilots. Then again, it wasn't just due to the unique circumstances of the war that he'd obtained the rank of Vice Hecto-Commander. The Star Forces couldn't be so short of personnel as to select any old soldier as a ship commander of a bleeding-edge vessel. Saabash cleared his head of the misgivings he'd chewed over countless times since receiving the notice of personnel change. To Saabash, who regarded himself as a merchant through and through, his rank as a soldier and his military status were transient things. That said, he was still enjoying his work. Immediately after passing through the portal, a huge bulk of information came flowing into the Flickob. Orders from above were mixed in with the general information and the personal messages meant for individual crew members. The orders were not confidential. Running his eyes over its contents, he saw they were the simple instructions that followed a familiarization voyage as a matter of course. He felt relieved. The familiarization voyage was fun, but the toil involved was exhausting. He was in no mood to be receiving any more intricate commands. He ordered his vice commander cum gunner to shift course. In assault ships, steering the ship was said to be a ship commander's role while in three space, but in larger vessels like battle line ships or patrol ships, that was the senior star pilot's job. The all-new class of vessels, raid ships, adopted the same allocation of labor as in large-sized ships. After the attitude control system held for a brief spell, the Flickoba's course became fixed. Sawbash then ordered the main engine stopped and broadcasted the following to all hands. "This is your ship commander speaking. The ship will now be entering inertial navigation. You are relieved from your shifts. As per the shift schedule, I permit the off-duty to take their breaks." Then he once again scanned the bridge. "I'll be needing all of you to keep working." His eyes met the navigator's. The navigator being the same as on the Bosroer Ekriwa. She'd been a rearguard star pilot there, but with her battle experience taken into account, she'd now been made a vanguard star pilot. And it was no coincidence she was his subordinate. The Star Forces gave ship captains the right to choose their subordinates. Naturally, those chosen enjoyed the power to turn them down, and the circumstances occasionally got in the way of the chooser and the chosen, even if they had a burning desire to be on the same ship. In their case, Sawbash wanted her along, and though he had no idea whether she was thrilled by his request, she at the very least didn't refuse it. Sawbash turned his gaze to the inspector supervisor's seat. He had nothing against the woman in that seat, but he had wanted Samson there instead. The inspector supervisor of the Flickob was instead Luas Goemer, mechanics Deca commander, Grinkiek. Just like Samson, she hailed from a land world. And since she'd worked her way from an NCC up to a Deca commander, there could be no doubt she was skilled and knowledgeable. Unfortunately, she just wasn't as fun to be around. For one, she never touched alcohol, perhaps due to religious reasons. In fact, if other crew members took to a drink or two, her face would scrunch. If that were all, Sawbash wouldn't have minded. After all, he himself was not all that fond of drink, but she responded the same way to light-hearted jokes, too. During his trading days, Sawbash rented supply ships and journeyed to the far corners of the Empire. He'd had to employ crews, of course, and so he'd had two criteria for selecting subordinates. One was hiring heterosexual males, not because he was particularly prejudiced against women or gay men, but because even giant ships had limited space in their living quarters, with relatively small crews. He just figured dealing with any romance that might spark in such a cramped environment sounded like a pain, and there were other diversions besides. The other criterion was for the employee in question to have some sort of bad habit. And while Grinchia's strict and rigid lifestyle could be called a bad habit in itself, it wasn't the kind of bad habit Sawbash preferred. Samson, on the other hand, had been a treasure trove of the bad habits Sawbash loved. His idle chatter would liven any room, and he'd even occasionally abandon his senses of his own volition. Just Sawbash's luck, then, that lovable jokester would retire from the Star Forces. From what he'd heard, Samson hadn't yet withdrawn to his home planet, but all the same, they'd probably never meet face-to-face ever again. A thought that made Sawbash feel a touch lonesome. He contemplated writing the man a lengthy letter. Granted, even if Samson had remained in the Star Forces, greeting him on the ship as its inspector supervisor wasn't in the cards anyway. His rank hadn't been high enough. His rate of promotion had been slow since his days as an NCC, and despite the fact it was wartime, all he'd managed to reach was rearguard star pilot. Although he could have still invited him as Roy Beinker, deputy inspector supervisor. Sawbash seemed about to grin. Just imagine the look on his face trying to work under Grinchia. Call military command headquarters. "I want to speak with the commandant of Sabtywer Kasna, Trampleblitz Squadron 1. Trampleblitz Squadron? Ekriua cocked her head. It's a new type of squadron. Though at the moment, the command center is all there is to it. We'll be part of Trampleblitz Squadron 1 the moment it's officially formed, explained Sawbash. Trampleblitz Squadron, huh, said the vice commander and gunner, Idliek. Now that's talking tough, with a name like that. We just have to hope it lives up to the name. Oh, I'm sure it will. This raid ship is a fine vessel. I've always thought patrol ships would be easier to handle if they'd just take out the mines, said Grinchia. Well, if that's what our tech master thinks, then it must be true. Thank you very much, sir. Trampleblitz Squadron was a novel word for Sawbash, too. He resolved to grasp the gist of the formations and personnel that were planned for Trampleblitz Squadron 1 while they waited to hear back from the Commandant. Each Trampleblitz Squadron was made up of 12 raid ships. 2 of the 12 ship commanders were called the Amsarer, senior ship commanders, and they were of Hecto Commander rank. If anything ever happened to a commanding officer, they would of course be replaced, and, depending on the situation, a platoon of about 4 ships was to be entrusted. However, unlike assault squadrons composed of assault units, SY Mage Dyrer, Trampleblitz units had not been long established, leaving room for formational flexibility. Ship Commander, said the communications officer, Rearguard Star Pilot Iatakek. The line is connected. The message lag is 2.7 seconds. Sawbash stood up and saluted. The Flickob has just finished its familiarization voyage and returned to base. I've just received orders from the Glagam Byrer Clayer, Training Fleet Command Center, to act under Your Excellency's command for the time being. Your orders, Commandant Ados Ryua. Thank you for your hard work, Ship Commander Sawbash, smiled Kilo Commander Ados Ryua, after returning the salute. I remember you. Yes, Kilo Commander, ma'am, said Sawbash, letting his saluting hand drop back down and nodding. I haven't yet had the honor of meeting you directly, but I was a senior star pilot on the Bossroar, a ship that was in the assault unit that you commanded. I know. I read the career log. I see. What a coincidence that we should cross paths again. A coincidence? Do you honestly believe that? She said, her tone a little teasing. Yes, ma'am. What else could it be? Said Sawbash, tilting his head in puzzlement. I see you're not very up on this sort of thing. I don't blame you. Judging by your career log, you're all about trading. Oh well, never mind that. We'll talk about that when we're assembled. There's no hurry on that front. The training fleet has already booked your ship to be lodged at Lakerdifaka Dambor Matmata, Special Construction Site 7022. Could I get your navigation plan? Please wait a moment. After double-checking the location and relative speed of the designated base, Sawbash set the acceleration to 5 Demon-G levels, calculated the route himself, and sent over the results through the communications officer. They could see Ados Ryua's eyes train left and right on screen as she read the message. I see you're taking things quite slowly, Vice Hecto Commander. I believe it would be best to proceed with caution while at the capital. The ship does, however, have resources to spare. We can expedite docking if required. That won't be necessary, said Ados Ryua. Once things have settled down aboard ship, come with all of your crew over to the restaurant named the Stylet. Let's have ourselves a modest little meet and greet before Trampleblitz Squadron 1's Glamsehoth, Crest bestowal ceremony. I was waiting for you guys. Then perhaps we should start accelerating, Sawbash almost said. It's fine, said Ados Ryua, waving off the suggestion. I just know you'll all be driven like horses in time, so I'd like for you to take it easy for now. You can ring out, around 30 hours at most? Besides, for a restaurant as big name as the Stylet, it'll be tough to reserve a room. Or are you the type that can't get a good night's sleep unless you're smack dab in the gleaming fields of battle? Decidedly not, Sawbash smiled. I'm not exactly yearning for the war zone quite yet, either. There are many things of beauty to be found outside the light show of combat. A crystal goblet filled with apple cider, for instance. Now then, until we meet again. The line dropped. Sawbash set himself back down into the commander's seat and ruminated on that brief conversation. It appeared that in the Empire, some affairs were not the concern of natural traders like him. And by the looks of things, Commandant Ados Ryua would explain it all. Her demeanor told him loud and clear that even if he were to say he didn't want to hear it, she'd regale him all the same. All right, any bridge personnel who are supposed to be off duty, feel free to rest. I will take a break as well. Deca Commander Idlia, I leave the rest to you. When they all stood up and saluted, Sawbash nodded in return, before withdrawing to his quarters. Then he began to write a letter to Samson, whose whereabouts he knew not. Samson was in Lokvakar. To be precise, he was in the Ladab commercial complex, known as Baidek. It was the largest of the countless commercial complexes in the imperial capital, with innumerable ships and recreational facilities. There was a bit of a housing shortage, but there were plenty of inns and hotels for people without homes in Lochvikar. Samson was currently staying in one of them, by Deck Hall. The breakfast served there was a classy, dressed-up dish of cuisine. The aroma was fine, but the flavor was unfortunately bland. And he felt like sprinkling heavy amounts of salt would come across as an insult to the chef, so Samson usually ate out. Thankfully, Bidek offered cuisines from various different land worlds. A recent favorite of his was an establishment named Grimstadt, whose fare evidently came from a land world named Bikran. That planet's name rang a bell, if faintly, and while he had no idea where the restaurant's name originated, the dishes on offer there were pretty tasty in any case. Of course, they couldn't hold a candle to Midgrat cuisine. But, much to his chagrin, there wasn't a single Midgrat restaurant or eatery in the whole of Lochvikar, let alone in Bidek. He could whip something up himself, but Samson was currently a busy man. He had no time to be cooking for himself. And so, once again, he found himself passing through the doors of Grimstadt in the morning. "Good morning, Mr. Samson, sir," said a waiter with a familiar face. "Can we get your usual?" "I wouldn't mind the usual, but I'm actually waiting for some lady guests today. I'll have the food after they arrive." The waiter smiled. A smile that was a bit too unabashed to be a business smile. "Are these lady guests of the beautiful variety, sir?" "All ladies are beautiful, if you ask me." "Yes, sir." "Shall I bring drinks until such time that your companions arrive?" Sure. What was that tea called again?" "Maxilon tea? Bring me some of that. I've gotten weirdly into the stuff." "Right away, sir." The waiter took his order, but not without a slight tinge of criticism about his eyes. "A few words, if I may. I don't believe there is anything weird about taking a liking to Maxilon tea." "You're totally right," said Samson. After a spell, his Maxilon tea came to the table. It was served hot, the considerably offbeat aroma wafting up. Samson poured some honey and wine and slowly sipped. His wrist gear buzzed. Someone was calling. "Oh, look who's giving me a ring." It was Pavarua, his erstwhile subordinate from his time on the Bosroar. Samson had spent many long years in the military and had enough old friends to show for it. But he was especially close with the old Bosroar gang. While they hadn't been with him during his first proper battle, they were blood brothers, their bond forged through escaping the maw of death as a unit. "It's been too long. Why don't you be honest with yourself and greet me as such?" "Well, if that isn't the Pavarua I've dearly missed. Not a day has gone by that hasn't felt colorless and dull from not having laid eyes on your visage. My bosom constricted by plaintive longing, my tear ducts parched. So parched I can't shed a tear even during this moment of deep, deep emotion. That enough for ya?" I'll allow it," said Pavarua, feeling generous. "So, what's the story?" Samson noticed Pavarua wasn't wearing a military uniform. "You had civvy clothes on you, too, huh?" "Course I do. Especially seeing as I won't be wearing the uniform from now on." "So you retired?" "It was time for you to retire, too, Inspector Supervisor. Shouldn't come as a shock if it was time for me, too." "It's not a shock, but I want to work with you again. Please hire me." "Buddy, you should have retired after consulting me, not before." "Are you that sure I won't turn you down?" "If you do, I'll look for work elsewhere. It's a seller's market. Can't think of a place with better benefits than the Star Forces, though. But thinking about it from a mortal peril perspective, the Star Forces are a uniquely rough work environment. And whether I live to see another day is on the top of my career concerns." "Then why'd you join to begin with?" "I didn't think there'd actually be a war." Well, guess we're no different on that count. Right? Anyway, are you going to hire me or not? A job interview's all I can promise." "Oh, come on, after all this time? If you still don't know me, what are you going to be gleaning from a 10-minute interview? You don't understand. I'm also a hiree," he said, in a non-joking tone of voice. "If you don't follow the formalized system, you can't meet face-to-face with Lanufapater, his Lord Excellency." Lanufapater, as in the clerk kid, right? He wasn't my direct superior, but we were comrades fighting on the same tiny ship. It's not like I don't know him at all. No calling him a kid. While us hirelings reserve the right to make fun of the boss, it wouldn't be a great look to hire somebody who makes fun of him from the outset. I'm not making fun of him. We chatted a few times, and I know he's a fine young man. For one, he's got some common sense for a noble. He does kind of lack the mystique of a lord of a territory nation, if you know what I mean. Yeah, thought Samson. He was now a servant vassal of the House of Hyde. The previous count, Jin's father, must have had vassals of his own, but no one knew where they were or what they were doing. All they knew was that they were no longer the vassals of Hyde. For all intents and purposes, Samson was the virtual first vassal. The House of Hyde would require many vassals in the coming times. Most urgently of all, they needed personnel for the reconstruction of the antimatter fuel factories. Samson was at the imperial capital in order to recruit more vassals for the countdom. But he was having trouble for, just as Pavarua said, it was a seller's market and precious few wished to be servants in an as-yet developing territory nation like the countdom of Hyde. As such, Samson actually appreciated Pavarua's request. The man's specialty lay in reactor furnaces, which was to say, in the consumption of antimatter fuel as opposed to its retrieval, but that expertise was also sought after by the House of Hyde. Samson had already decided to hire his former subordinates. When it came to personnel affairs, Jint had vested him with full authority, not only because he trusted him, but also due to logistical realities. After all, contacting people outside the star system required messages to be carried by ship through planar space, so it was impossible to seek the Lord's approval on every single matter. In any case, we should take lunch together. I aim to take my time interviewing you. Lunch today, if you can make it. Are you in Baideck? I should be able to make it, yeah. If you want, I can even make it to breakfast if I fly out the door. Is the House of Hyde treating? Sure is. Sweet. Mind if I pick out the place? I know a good one, though it is a tad pricey. Can't have that. Your taste is not to be trusted. Based on what? How can I place my trust in the taste buds of a man who scarfed down Star Force's food with such relish? Dude, it wasn't that bad. Especially when you're hungry. And I agree that it's not the best food ever. See, there you go. You appraised it as not that bad. Those are not the words of a man with a functioning palate. You're horrible. Don't you ever feel like broadening your horizons? Guess you're right, said Samson. Just once, trying my chances with expensive and unappetizing eats ought to build character. Then it's a date. I'll message you back after making the reservation. That okay? If you could do that for me, it'd be a huge help, since I've got a lot on my plate at the moment, but by the same token, I'm only free from 12 to 13 o'clock. I leave it to you. Okay, got it. It's a shame we can't set aside more time, though. Samson felt much the same. Sorry, bud. There's always next time. Right. So, seeing as you don't have much time, I'll ask now, what made you want to be a servant vassal? Did the kid, Lonnie Dryer, ask you? No, I asked him. How come? Well, you know how I'm gonna go back home and start a farm, right? Yeah, that's why you have me wondering. I thought you'd be flinging around livestock dung as fertilizer on your home planet right around now. I figured I'd learn a lesson or two from raising up a new territory nation that I could apply to running a farm. Really? And here I assumed you were just doing it for the money again. The money? That's not an issue. If I can make myself a fair bit, then you won't see me complaining. You won't see me complaining either. Mr. Samson, sir, whispered the waiter from nearby. Your companions have arrived. Ah, thanks. Samson faced the riskier. See you later, Pavarua. Sure thing. The line dropped. Samson then stood up to greet the three women. Mr. Samson? Of the House of Hyde, asked the one in the middle. Yes, I am Gaboshiak, main retainer, Samson Borg Tyrusser Tyrusek. Cerny Limited, I presume. Yes, I'm Fagdakpek Cernaik, said the middle woman, nodding, though not without a faint tinge of disappointment in her eyes. I hear you've a letter of introduction from Fee Lartner.